Yeah, we're good to go. Okay, half a day, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I'm here today with Attorney General Leevin Camacho, and we're going to discuss the opinion on the applicability of the double pay provision. Again, thank you for joining us. What we'll do is the AG will connect here and discuss some of the topics found within the opinion. And then thereafter, we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. We'll begin with the questions received via email, and then we'll open it up for general questions after that. Okay. With that, AG Camacho.
Hafide and good morning. Just to give some context, we received a request from Senator San Agustin on DOA Rule 8406 and its applicability to the COVID-19 pandemic. We issued our opinion yesterday, and in looking at the language, we identified that there are a minimum of three criteria that need to be met before any employee would be eligible for double pay. The first would be that there is a state of emergency or declaration of state of emergency, and the governor did declare a state of emergency in March of this year, so that has been met. The two more complicated criteria would be whether an employee's facility is closed. And as we pointed out, there were three categories of government of Guam agencies: those that were deemed non-essential and closed, those that were deemed close to the public but open for operations, and those that were fully operational and open to the public. So although the request was for a more blanket opinion, we don't have enough facts before us, and it would really depend on the specific circumstances of the agency and the status of that facility. The last criteria would be whether or not, or the person was required, the status of the employee, or whether they were required to remain on duty in order to perform essential services. And the governor's executive order did point out that everyone would remain on work status. So we have a situation where, again, it's not a very neat answer. It's going to depend on whether or not the appointing authority or director of an agency identified employees as providing essential services, and then they were required to report to work. So this is not a very clear-cut thing. Everyone's going to have to go through and determine on an agency-by-agency level whether or not they could potentially be entitled to either double pay or compensatory time pursuant to Rule 8406. We did point out that under this rule, as it was written, it wasn't intended to cover pandemic responses. So there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of, we recognize the sacrifice and the risk that our first responders have had to go through in this situation. But this rule was not intended to cover a situation like this. And I know they've talked about typhoon pay. This is just something new. So we cannot put a square peg in a round hole, and that's what they're trying to do with this existing rule. And as we pointed out, there are very tough policy decisions that our elected or other elected officials have to make. But we are our role has been to decide who is able to be paid under Rule 8406 and not who should be paid. That's a policy decision that the legislature needs to make. So with that, Carlene, I'll open it up to questions.
Okay. This is from Jasmine Stoll of the PDN. Her first question is, if the legislature were to amend the policy during this public health emergency, what then becomes of the differential pay executive order?
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. There was actually a bill that was introduced into the legislature that would have codified by statute, it would have been a legislative act to codify the differential pay that's part of the executive order. That was passed and then vetoed, but the legislature ultimately has the ability to set compensation pay. So if they were to amend, Rule 8406 is different than the differential pay that is or has been implemented by the governor. So the legislature has the ability to set pay and can do so. And I don't think it would necessarily it wouldn't make the differential pay order go away necessarily. So they could work together, they can codify, and that's actually what the initial plan was, for the legislature and the governor to work together. I don't know if that answers your question, Jasmine, or do you have a follow-up?
Okay, we'll go on to Jasmine's second question. Jasmine, if you've got follow-up questions after this, we'll go ahead and queue those up along with everyone else who has joined us virtually. Second question from Jasmine Stoll for the PDN. To clarify, the AG noted no instances of line agency employees receiving double pay under this rule during the past public health emergencies. Have autonomous or semi-autonomous agencies followed this double pay rule during emergencies? End question.
So we did ask DOA whether or not they had any records of people receiving double pay under Rule 8406, and they were not able to find any documentation to support that. And the reason why we were interested in is because the way it's been reported, people have received double pay in past emergencies, and this was the first time that they have not received it. So that we wanted to just clarify, and that's the information that we received, is that the government has never paid out double pay under Rule 8406. Now, as far as semi-autonomous agencies, I read in the media that they may have implemented double pay, but they do they can set their own rules when it comes to compensation. So that would be the difference.
Okay, thank you, AG. We'll now go ahead and open it up for questions. I leave it to, let's go ahead. I'm just going to go from the top. I have Jolene Toves with PNC. Jolene, if you want to go ahead and ask the AG questions. And then following Jolene, we have Jason Salas from KUAM. Jolene?
Yes. So you mentioned that autonomous agencies can set their own pay. Now, with that in mind, wouldn't it be necessary also, because they're the utilities, that it would have to garner PUC and CCU approval, and there would have to be an open government or open government law where a meeting is held and the public is apprised of that meeting? So that there's no violations of open government law?
I'm aware of the open government law in terms of what processes they went through to potentially approve a double pay during this emergency. I'm not familiar. Our opinion was limited to Rule 8406. So I'm not really prepared to give an opinion on what autonomous agencies or semi-autonomous agencies are doing.
All right.
But they do have additional authority to set their pay, and that's been determined by the legislature.
Yes, yes. And it has to be approved by PUC and CCU. Correct?
Again, I'm not prepared to talk about what GWA or GPA may have done in this emergency.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Jason?
Okay, I'm doing tech support, so I'd like to defer to my colleague, Adriana Patero, please.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I was going to say I'm doing tech support, so I'd like to defer to my colleague, Adriana Patero, please.
Yeah, if that's okay. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Sabrina.
Okay.
Thank you. We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I have quite a few questions. I don't know if we're planning on going in rounds, but I can just do you want me to just go through all of them right now?
We can maybe do a couple and then circle back if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify beforehand, but
Thanks.
all right. Well, thank you. So, just for my first question, I want to say that, so we know about 400 people have signed on with the Guam Federation of Teachers lawsuit on the double pay, and a majority of them are Guam Police Department officers. So we know some of the precincts have been closed. In addition, there's Guam Department of Education nurses stationed at these hospitals. that are providing aid, but schools are closed. So if the double pay is determined on whether a facility's doors were locked or not, then there seems to be a fine line here. So how does the language in this law then, essentially, how does it provide any justice during the state of emergency for all? I feel like there's just quite a fine line there.
And I think that's where a lot of the community is at. There's going to be a lot of inequity through the strict application of Rule 8406. So, I think the best way to do it is we have to determine, our policymakers have to determine who should be entitled to differential pay for this COVID-19 emergency. Once they've decided who should be entitled to that pay, then they need to set a mechanism that would be appropriate. And you've brought up a very good example where nurses who are working for DOE and their facilities are closed, but then they've been detailed to assist in the response, they may get the differential pay or potentially could get it, and then the people that they're working with would not. So those are the types of inequities that are going to happen because of the way that the rule, it wasn't intended to cover this type of situation. And, I do want to point out, we submitted testimony over a month ago when there was the bill initially introduced, and we pointed out that if there is uncertainty about who is entitled to pay, there's going to be litigation. So our advice was to set very clear rules and have a very clear mechanism to identify those employees who should be entitled to the pay, and then work from there. So I'm not disagreeing with you. Unfortunately, that's the rule that's the rule as it is written, and that's what our opinion was limited to.
So just going off of that, of course, as you mentioned, it's an opinion, so it was issued. But however, once tried in court, then an argument brought forward could be then that there's no precedence or standing because of the single criteria unmet. And then, with that being said, you're an independent office. So can we get an independent answer on this?
At that point, we would be representing the government of Guam. So if they choose to file suit and to challenge and to claim they're entitled to it, then we will be representing the government of Guam at that point.
Okay. So I'll come back, or if we want to keep going, or do you want me to keep going with questions, Carlina?
Yeah, you can do a couple more and then we can move on.
Okay. So, in your legal opinion, you state that compensation for government employees is dictated through policy created by the legislature. However, the governor, through her executive order, dictated compensation for government employees outside of the legislative process. So do you believe the governor had the authority to do this? And will you be issuing an opinion on whether or not you think this is lawful?
We haven't received a request for an opinion. I can tell you that it was brought up, and there is an open question. My understanding, and you can confirm this with the governor, is that the differential pay is being paid using CARES Act funds. And there's a question of whether or not that is subject to local appropriation. And in fact, our courts have said otherwise. So the governor may have more ability through the use of federal funds directly appropriated to the executive branch.
Okay.
If she was using local funds to pay the differential pay, I think that would be definitely inching closer to a potential violation of the Organic Act.
Okay. And so, so for another question I have, we know under a state of emergency, the governor is given special emergency powers or extraordinary authority under any out of the ordinary, circumstances. And to get some context, actually, let me first ask, when it came to the hotel quarantine contracts, you did not sign off on any of them. So, yes or no, is that acceptable by the law for the governor to have overridden that and, negated your signature on that memo? Because if she's able to do that, then does that mean the governor could potentially also have the legal authority to also overstep and apply this double pay compensation to the essential workers, despite not all three criteria requirements being met? Because we know that when it came to that suspension of procurement laws, she cited the Title 10 special powers that she can suspend certain provisions.
I saw in the news that 2 people tested positive for COVID-19 yesterday. And it's just, you think back and it's barely a blip on our radars now. And we know that this virus isn't going anywhere. But, I'm going to ask you to think back to March 16, when Guam had its first 3 cases announced, and the mindset as a community, as an island we were at. So I just, I think now we can focus on, and we have the privilege of focusing on, and I think it's good that we want transparency. We deserve it. But I also think we're coming at it from now and not really judging things the way they were happening and as they were happening. So Chapter 10, Title 10, Chapter 19 does allow for the suspension of rules and actually talks about emergency purchases to respond to a public health emergency. So in terms of whether or not the governor, it was legal or not legal, I think we all need to recognize the law allows for certain rules to be suspended under certain circumstances for certain purposes. Now, whether or not the purchases, the quarantine facilities met that, we don't have enough of the record to really come to a decision. I would love to come out and just have an opinion, and then if I make a mistake, that's last week's news cycle and mea culpa, but that's not the way our office works. We have to get the full record, we have to review all relevant documents, and we are going to make a determination, and we are going to review the processes that were followed, but we're just not in a position today to tell you one way or the other what the extent of the governor's authority under Title 10, Chapter 19 is.
Okay, thank you. Just before I finished, just to clarify with the language within this law. So employees on, I had read a part, and it seems that employees on payroll at, like, for example, at GMH, they're able to qualify for the double pay during the pandemic, but doctors and nurses, first responders do not qualify.
I'm sorry, where did you see that?
When I had read the memo, you had said that it seemed that as far as the double pay comes, that potentially the employees on payroll could get it because they're not working at the facilities or not there, but the doctors and nurses and first responders do not qualify. Is that right? One
of the criteria is that you're reporting to work while your facility is closed. And we pointed out the inequity that GMH has remained open. And you also brought up some precincts were closed, some precincts were open. So if one of the criteria is your facility is closed, you would not be eligible. If your facility is not closed, if your facility is open, you would not be eligible for pay. So that's correct. Nurses, doctors at GMH, their facility is open, so they would not be by rule entitled to double pay.
Okay, and also just for some more clarification, so you're saying that directors of each agency can then make the determination and pay out double pay to their essential employees, and that would be legal?
I'm not saying it. The rule says that the appointing authority has to determine who the employees are and whether a facility is closed or not. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, if we want to get Nick Delgado with the post on, and then Jasmine from the PDN can go after him.
Thank you. Hey, AG Camacho, thanks for taking the time out to speak with us on your opinion. So it seems that in your opinion, it pretty much leaves open the possibility for these essential workers to then still get double pay, and like you stated, either by changing the law, or it would be up to that directive authority or that authority over that agency to make that final determination. But in your review of this rule, would you be able to say whether or not the governor herself has the executive authority, just as she did to implement the differential pay, to instead enforce paying the double during this current emergency?
The Organic Act gives the legislature the authority to set pay. And again, this is where we're coming down to what is the source, the funding source, whether it's an appropriation. And I'm going to be honest with you, Nick, I can't, we've issued an opinion on 8406. I'm not prepared to go into this. This is all brand new. And I know the CARES Act does allow for, I think it would be good for all of you to review the Treasury guidance on what are allowable expenses or expenditures of the CARES Act funds. But this is a little bit different, than what we're accustomed to. So we have a direct appropriation from the federal government to the executive branch, and they're going to spend it in a certain way. It's going to potentially come down to, is this pay? Is it a bonus? You look at some of the other ways that the governor has used other payments that she's issued. Those aren't necessarily based on Guam law either, right? So once you go down this road of what can the governor do, what kind of relief or support can the governor do in response to the pandemic, then potentially you're going to be able to challenge all these other programs that she's trying to implement through the use of CARES Act funds. So that's I can't really say, but it is different. If these were local funds, it would be much clearer that the governor could not do this. It would be up to the legislature to set compensation.
Okay, and just to a follow-up question that was mentioned earlier by one of my colleagues, in your opinion, it stated that double pay isn't possible for government healthcare workers because they don't meet all of the three elements, and specifically the facility where the employee works must be closed. But in speaking with some of the nurses about the responses to your opinion, they're saying that it's a similar situation like when we experience the the typhoons that hit our island. They're saying that they don't operate as normal, just as we're not operating as normal in this current pandemic. What's your response to that?
We're so used to the typhoon response, and that's the way our minds work, right? But as we point out in the opinion, there's a significant difference between a typhoon where condition 1, condition 2, it's very clear when we're in those conditions and what criteria we need to move out of it. So I guess, Nick, my question is, should it have to be that complicated? If the policymakers decide and recognize that first responders should be entitled to differential pay, whatever the number is, whether it's 200%, 25%, 15%, I think the best and the cleanest way to do it would be to pass a law setting it, right? Because we're going to go down this road and there's going to be inequity because of this rule was not intended to cover that situation. So I am hopeful. We have a lot of really bright people that are in the legislature. I know the governor has already adopted differential pay. Between the brain power, I hope that we can come up with a solution that's not only going to be legal, but it's going to be fair to everyone.
Right. Yeah, because some of the similar concerns that I'm hearing from the frontliners, the police officers that have been out there on the beat on patrol and responding to the unknowns during this pandemic, they're saying, well, then does this mean that officers and essential workers like us who have been getting paid, like with what we said with the typhoons and the double pay, was that then illegal for them to get that as they're not getting it presently?
Yeah, the typhoon pay is actually set by statute, and I think it's 1.5 times your rate. So that's a very key difference. There is law that establishes typhoon pay, and it goes back to we're very accustomed with typhoons. We know what we have to do. Typhoon condition 2, everyone goes home and they put their shutters up. You buy water. This has been very unique, and there are. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. 8406 was not meant to cover this type of situation.
Would you support then legislation that would clarify this rule and then set forth potential pay, such as double pay, whenever we come across a situation like this pandemic?
Yeah, we just recognize, Nick, that without clarity, that there's going to be a lot of inequity and a lot of confusion and potentially, or very realistically, a lot of litigation. So, my personal opinion, I would love for there to be a very clear, make a policy decision, and identify who needs to get paid, what rates they need to be paid, and let's take care of our first responders.
And that's what I was going to say. Just pretty much as someone who is part of the law enforcement community, what is your message to those first responders out there who have been fighting and now plan to take legal action to this?
No, I hope I've been told that I've been getting a lot of people angry because of our opinion and the applicability or inapplicability. And I guess I'm just hopeful, and I think we all need a little bit more of that we have some time here to fix it. That there's some real problems with this rule, and there's going to result in some real inequities. And I just hope again our policymakers can get together and fix this.
Okay, I'll come back around for the next one. Thank you.
Jasmine?
Hafide, thank you. Attorney General, just a really quick clarification. Is this a legal opinion or a legal memoranda, and can you clarify the difference? I just want to be accurate.
It's a legal opinion, and your guess is as good as mine as the difference. I just know we have to transmit it to the legislature, or else I get fined $100 for every day we're late. So,
got it. And so you mentioned that it could be potentially a lot of litigation. I don't know if it's too soon to ask, but are you preparing to defend this in civil service and in court? Is your office sort of preparing for that?
We're monitoring the situation, and we're hoping that this is going to be resolved. But I think we see and we can understand the frustration in the application of this rule. But at the end of the day, Jasmine, we do have our office represents the government of Guam, so we're going to have to do our jobs and advocate for our client.
Right. And have you shared this with the governor?
I believe she was copied, as well as Director Byrne.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, Jolene, do you have some additional questions? And then after Jolene, we'll go ahead and go back to Adriana or Sabrina from KUAM.
I'm okay. I'm okay. Can you hear me? I'm okay.
Yes, okay. Okay, okay, we'll go ahead and move on then to Adriana. Did you have additional questions, or Sabrina?
Sorry, I was figuring out how to unmute myself on this thing, but just one real quick. So you mentioned that the legislator can set the compensation for GovGuam employees, and the governor had established this new differential pay policy, but it wasn't done through the legislature. So can you explain and clarify how that is exactly legal?
It's going to come down to the source of the appropriation. So if it's CARES Act funds, it's a direct. If it was an appropriation or money given to the governor, it wouldn't necessarily fall within the appropriation power of the legislature.
Okay. I think I'm good. I don't know who else is next.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions?
I just have one follow-up, AG Camacho. So if the governor then decides to use any of the CARES Act funding or any of the federal funding that the island receives to go towards paying this double pay or any other hazardous pay during the pandemic, that seems to be more of the easy fix, so to speak.
I read things, and I don't know if this is the time, but there seems to be a lot of confusion about CARES Act and FEMA reimbursement. And I do want to point out that if CARES Act, if you're using federal funds for one of the stated purposes in the CARES Act, I'm not sure why you would seek reimbursement, or if you would need reimbursement from FEMA. So I'm just flagging that, Nick, not for you in specific, but just in general, as the media should be aware that it's unclear whether or not you would even need to get FEMA reimbursement if you're using federal funds on the front end, which is something different than we normally would experience with typhoons. Now, with respect to what the governor can or can't do with the CARES Act, I think she's released a budget in terms of how she plans on using those funds. And that's a policy decision that the governor needs to make in balancing, going back to this, we're talking about double pay now, and we have to recognize there are a lot of people going through economic hardship on the island. There are thousands of people who are unemployed, businesses that have closed, and the governor, there's a finite amount of money that's going to be able to go around. So it's not going to be an easy policy decision for her to make, or the legislature, but that's the reality. So I appreciate that that's the balance they're having to strike in responding.
Have any, I know that some of your employees as well at the Attorney General's office continue to work through this pandemic still, covering whatever services and filings were over at the Judiciary of Guam and elsewhere. Has there been any similar concern out of your office? People asking about double pay and about the differential pay since all of this was started?
We've been operational this entire time, Nick.
Yeah.
I have some of our team that have worked every day for the last 8 weeks because there's a lot going on. I know the focus has been on procurement, but the quarantining process itself, there's a lot of other procurement that's been going on. Our prosecution division has been extremely busy. We've been responding to consumer complaints for price gouging. I think we're probably close to 200 at this point. Our solicitor division, we have 4 attorneys that are responsible for reviewing and helping in procurement. These opinions, the litigation that's been filed revolving road closure. So, we've been very busy as an office, and I think I'm proud to say our office has been very mission first. They understand the role that we play, the services that we provide to the people of Guam, and if they get differential pay, I think it'll be icing on the cake for them. But you come to work for the office because you want to serve the people of Guam, and we've been doing it throughout this entire time.
Okay. So no concerns regarding double pay coming your way then out of your office?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything. Yeah, I know employees are aware of it in terms of. I haven't heard anything specific, Nick. I don't. Okay. I can tell you that my management team, they don't expect to get any kind of double pay or even differential pay. They are mission first.
All right. And is there any other efforts that the Attorney General's office has been involved with now that the island is in P Court 2, in whatever response efforts they have been out there this week?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And hopefully I'll get to get on with you and talk with you about it. But I am extremely proud of our team, our IT team. We've moved to remote work. We've really had to accelerate our movement in technology. We've actually set up video conference meeting rooms and deployed them this week where, for our employee safety and for consumer safety, they're able to come up. We provide them with a computer, they log in, and they're able to talk to someone on the other side if they have questions about child support. We're looking to extend that services so that we have to recognize as well that a lot of people don't have tech. And, we have victims who may want to participate in court hearings. So we are setting up rooms for those victims who don't have internet at home to come to our office and they can participate or call into the court. So, we're trying to get through this now. We're having to adjust operationally, but I'm thinking 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, how can we, respond to the pandemic and improve our services to the people of Guam through the use of tech for those who have it available. So, it's a very scary time. It's a very exciting time. And I think it's really gotten, I've seen a lot of innovation on our team that probably would have come up outside of this pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. If you have any follow-up questions, you can certainly email me, and we want to thank your viewers for tuning in as well. Everyone stay safe and be healthy. AG.
Thank you all.